This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show begins with the cattle market update from Tyler Cozzens, Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, as he focuses on feeder and fed cattle prices, as well as cattle trade. Tina Sullivan, K-State Extension agronomist, continues the show as she explains how to manage Sericea Lespedeza, which can be an issue in pastures as well as other places. A segment of Faces in Agriculture with Michael Springer, who is located in Montgomery and Wilson County, ends the show as he discusses Springer Family Foods. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. Tyler, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Tyler, what are we seeing for cattle prices?
Sure, yeah. So kind of doing some cattle price update, looking specifically here at the feeder cattle side of things for Dodge City, Kansas. So some of the comparisons here we have to keep in mind, we're comparing to Memorial Day week. So there are some prices that weren't reported, but overall, kind of going through some of these prices, 5 to 6 weights on the steer side of things were $3.97, so almost $4 there last week. That's actually up about 26% from a year ago. 6 to 7 weights were $3.40 last week. That's up about $14 from the prior week. 7 to 8 weights were $3.10. That's up about $33, almost $34 from the prior week. 8 to 9 weights were $3.03. That's up over $9. And then 900 to 1,000 were $287.60. That's a pretty strong gain from a year ago. Looking on the heifer side of things, 5 to 6 weights were $3.51. That's up about 29% from a year ago. 6 to 7 weights were just over $3 per pound, and that's actually up from a year ago about 16%. 7 to 8 weights were $2.95. That's up about $10 from the prior week. 8 to 9 weights were $2.72, almost $2.73, up about $3 from the prior week. 900 to 1,000 pounds were $2.61. That's up about $12 from the prior week. On the fed side of things, looking at the 5-area weekly weighted average direct slaughter cattle prices that were reported from AMS on the live side, steers and heifers. Steers were $298.94, so just almost hit that $230 mark. That's actually up almost $3 from the prior week, up over $41 from a year ago. On the heifer side, still on live basis, $228.63. That's up over $1.50 from the prior week and over $40 from a year ago. On the dress side of things, we were $368 on the steer side and $369 for the heifers. That's up about 2% or about $5 to $6. And compared to a year ago, up about $67 to over $68. So strong prices on the fed side of things. Looking over at the box beef cutout value and negotiated sales, specifically the cutout value last week was $365.53. That's up less than $1 from the prior week and up almost $50 from a year ago. So seeing some strong gains there in the cutout value, specifically, chuck, round, loin, brisket, short plate, and flank have all shown strong increases compared to a week ago. With gains of about 1 to almost 4%, but strong gains compared to a year ago, about 13 to almost 25%. Really, the only one that's shown a little bit of weakness here in recent primal values is the rib. It's actually down about $14, almost $15 compared to a week ago. So that's really the only thing that's kind of weighing a little bit on the cutout value, but overall still seeing some strong gains there in the cutout side of things.
And Tyler, as we're talking about cattle prices, what are some regional cattle prices?
Sure, yeah. So we've seen some kind of interesting dynamics happen on the regional side of things for just feeder and fed cattle prices. So I kind of want to touch on some of those things that are happening there. And so kind of taking this regional perspective, what I kind of want to talk about were some of the prices through some of the reported markets in the middle part of the country, looking specifically at Billings, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. And so kind of starting off some of that discussion, you'll recall I just kind of mentioned some of the prices in Kansas there of those specifically looking at the 5 to 6 weights steers in Kansas. They're actually nearly hit that $400 per hundredweight price last week at $397.51. That was actually a record, and that's actually up from $346 at the start of the year. Now we kind of look at Billings and kind of move through the middle part of the country. Though 5 to 6 weight feeder steer price was actually $4.15 last week, which is up from $3.50 at the start of the year. And actually at this time last year in Billings, prices were just below $3.50 per hundredweight in Billings there. Now moving over to South Dakota, feeder steer prices in South Dakota have been under pressure here in recent weeks. But last week's feeder per steer price was $3.82 per hundredweight, which is down from actually $4.23 just only 2 weeks ago. So some pretty strong pressure there in South Dakota. But overall, looking at that $3.82 price last week is still above a year ago, which prices were at $3.50 just a year ago. On the Nebraska side of things, still some strong prices there at $4.28 last week for those 5 to 6 weights. That's a significant increase from $3.50 just a few months earlier in January there, and well above what we were seeing a year ago, which were around $3.60 there in Nebraska. Looking in Oklahoma, 5 to 6 weights actually hit nearly $3.78 last week, which is up from $3.39 at the start of the year. And Texas, those 5 to 6 weights started the year at $3.20 per hundredweight, but prices have actually increased over the last several weeks and actually were $3.60 last week. So overall, across the board, kind of looking at those 5 to 6 weight feeder steer prices, some strong gains since the start of the year and well above what we were seeing last year as we kind of look through the middle part of the country. And a lot of this is just being driven by supplies, which are, we've been talking about. They remain tight. They're expected to remain tight, especially through the summer. And that's been providing a lot of support for the prices here in the near term. Now, if we kind of look at some more of those regional feeder cattle price discussion and kind of switch over here to the Fed side of things, still some interesting discussion like we just had on the feeder side of things. So looking here at kind of the middle part of the country as far as price action has been going, I mentioned some of the discussion in the 5 area Fed steer price. It was actually $2.30 last week. That's up $41 from last year's price. If we kind of go through some of those other markets, Iowa, Minnesota, last week's price was very strong at $2.34 per hundredweight. That's up almost $44 from last year. Nebraska posted a healthy $2.35 last week, which was nearly $45 above last year. As I had mentioned, Kansas posted a strong price at $2.22 last week. That's an increase of $36 from the prior year. And then you look at Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. They reported a Fed steer price of $2.22 last week, which was an increase of $36 from last year. So overall, strong prices on the Fed steer side of things continue to be the trend. Seasonally prices tend to soften, kind of leading up to this July 4th holiday, which is something that we'll be looking for here in the next few weeks.
And Tyler, we've talked a lot in the past about New World screwworm and also how some trade could be affected. And how has that impacted just cattle trade?
Yeah, so kind of looking here, as you mentioned, just specifically on this cattle trade side of things, it's kind of this April trade data that recently came out, kind of gives us a little bit of a glimpse here at maybe some potential impacts. Still a little bit early in the game to see how things are really going to flesh themselves out. But I think it's still worth kind of noting some of these things, specifically on the cattle side of things, since we just had the discussion on just sort of some of the price action for feeder and fed side of things. That does play into just some of overall price dynamics. And so specifically looking at this cattle trade side of things in April, total cattle imports in April were actually just over 125,000 head. That was actually down 47%, or about 110,000 head from a year ago. So it's a sharp decline. A lot of that is driven by just lower import levels from Mexico. Cattle imports from Mexico were actually just over 88,000 head in April. That's actually down 41% from last year. Now, we do import from Canada as well. That imports from Canada in April were actually down 57% from a year ago to just about 37,000 head during the month there. Now, kind of looking at things from a year-to-date standpoint through the first 4 months of the year, so January through April, total cattle imports were nearly 500,000 head. That's actually down 35% from the same 4-month period in 2024. Most of the year-to-date decline in cattle imports is due mainly to fewer cattle coming in from Mexico, which is, I would argue, is partly tied to just the detection of New World screwworm in Mexico back in November, and just more recently another detection closer to the U.S. border. Now, conversely, the sharp decline in cattle imports from Canada is going to be more closely related to the implementation of tariffs. So we're starting to get some of that glimpse of potential impacts, just overall trade flows from those tariffs. But as we move forward, we'll see a little bit more of that play out. And we're seeing a little bit of that play out in just some of the weekly data that we get that has been released for the month of May. USDA AMS does release weekly data, And so kind of what we're seeing as far as expectations for May cattle trade numbers, looking at Mexico, imports from Mexico on a weekly basis, we're actually lower in May compared to a year ago. Now, recall that USDA shut down the border in May due to further reported case of New World Screwworm, which has actually moved a lot closer to the U.S. border. And so the border still remains closed, and that's still kind of the expectation moving forward. USDA has not given any signal that they're going to change that decision here anytime soon. So those imports from Mexico will continue to remain to be zero here in the near term. Now, looking on the Canada side of things, weekly cattle imports from Canada were reported down about 6,000 to 7,000 head on average during the month of May, and I would argue that's likely due in part to those tariffs. So overall, on the cattle import side of things, expectation is that those will remain below year-ago levels in May and likely in the near term as tariffs and this New World Screwworm situation continue to limit just overall trade flows for cattle. So as we kind of wrap up some of the discussion here, just kind of recapping a few things, overall we're seeing just stronger cattle prices and just limited trade flows of cattle coming into the country. And keep in mind that we're still seeing limited overall supply availability for cattle just in feedlots and so forth. So the tighter supplies are definitely price supportive for the overall cattle sector here moving forward. And so that's kind of the expectation as far as stronger prices here through the rest of the summer.
Tyler, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about control of Sericea Lespedeza with K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. Tina, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Tina, what is Sericea Lespedeza?
So Sericea Lespedeza is a perennial legume with trifoliate leaves. When we think of trifoliates, we think of the clover-shaped leaves. It is a major invasive species for rangeland, pastures, and some CRP acres in Kansas. Kind of the spread of it is mainly in that eastern to central corridor of Kansas, but it is kind of heading into a few counties of the west. For this invasive noxious weed, it has covered over 460,000 acres, so controlling it is a pretty big deal.
And this weed isn't only in Kansas, correct?
Correct. This is a weed that's a major concern of a lot of the southeast portion of the United States, stretching for most of Virginia, the Carolinas, to the deep south of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and even down into Texas, but also goes as far north as Michigan and Wisconsin.
What is the life cycle of it?
So it is a perennial, so it takes multiple years to get it controlled, and that's why it's such a major problem. Once it kind of gets established, we got to stay on top of it.
When does most of the seed production happen?
So for this plant, it gets about 3 feet tall. It will start to bloom in August with some white to cream colored flowers, and a lot of the seed production from these flowers will be produced in September.
Tina, a lot of times when we think about weed control, sometimes prescribed burning is something that is used, but is that something we potentially want to avoid for Sericea Lespedeza?
For Sericea Lespedeza, we do want to stay away from burning because it actually does stimulate the germination of the seeds. So when it comes to control, we really need to think about our chemical options, with mid-May to June being a good time to control those new seedlings in those established plants that are 10 to 12 inches in height.
And why is this time of year a good time to work on controlling it?
We want to control it in this stage because before we go really deep into our reproductive or those flowering stages, we're still in vegetative growth. The plant's still rapidly growing, so the uptake of herbicides is more effective. And by the end of June, the plants become more branched and woody, making the efficacy of those products less.
Are they usually in bunches or just scattered randomly throughout a pasture?
So for where they're located, they're going to probably be pretty thick in number once they get established and going. If you refer back to the e-update that we've published on this topic, you'll see some pictures where you can see the Sericea has pretty much overtaken what was the native grass that's there.
So what are some of those herbicides that someone might want to use for chemical control?
So for chemical control options for Sericea, during the vegetative growth stage, we tend to suggest Remedy Ultra or Pasture Guard. For those broadcast applications of Remedy, we say 1 to 2 pints per acre, and Pasture Guard HL at 3/4 to 1.5 pints per acre in spray volumes of 10 to 20 gallons of water per acre. Another herbicide option would be Surmount at 2 pints per acre. However, Surmount is a restricted use pesticide and would be a good choice if you're also wanting to treat rough leaf, dogwood, or blackberries at the same time. So once Sericea starts to branch or kind of go more into that woody stage, Metrofusson containing herbicides like Escort at 1/2 to 1 ounce per acre can be effective. So we've talked a lot about those broadcast applications. Say the Lespedeza is less in number, maybe more of just a patchy situation compared to really becoming a carpet, so to speak. We can do some spot applications of Pasture Guard HL of 1/2 fluid ounce per gallon of water, or we can use 1% solution of Remedy in water. So there's our spot applications. We can also do aerial applications of these products with a minimum spray volume of 3 gallons per acre. If we go up to 5 gallons per acre, it's more effective.
And do we have to be concerned about any restrictions when it comes to livestock going back to these pastures?
So there's no grazing or haying restrictions for livestock or lactating grazing animals following the use of Remedy Ultra or Pasture Guard HL. There is a 14-day wait period prior to hay harvest using these two herbicides. In regards to that Surmount, that restricted use herbicide we stated, there is no waiting period before grazing all livestock except for lactating dairy cows, and it needs 14 days before grazing. Surmount also requires a 7 to 14-day waiting period before hay harvest, depending on whether or not the hay is fed to beef or lactating dairy animals. In terms of Escort, there's no grazing or haying restrictions. Despite us saying all this, always refer back to the label for your information.
And just wanting to remember, you've mentioned it a couple of times that this is not a one-and-done control. So how long does it sometimes take?
So herbicide treatments must be repeated every 2 to 4 years to keep this invasive species in check. Initial treatments may reduce those dense stands to where we can then do those spot applications in future years. If we leave this untreated, Sericea can dominate a site, greatly reducing forage production and that species diversity that we're looking for in our forage stands.
And there is an e-update article on this titled Early Summer Control of Sericea Lespedeza Using Herbicides, and that's one way you can learn more about things from K-State Agronomy. However, there's also an upcoming field day, and what is that field day that's taking place?
So we have an upcoming field day at the North Central Experiment Field in Scandia. It is on June 12th, starting at 9 a.m. We're referring to this one as the Wheat Variety Development and Management Field Day. We're going to have wheat specialists of Drs. Romulo Lalato, Alan Fritz, and Kelsey Onofre going over topics that regard the targeted management and management strategies and some varieties towards scab and wheat streak mosaic complex. Dr. Alan Fritz is going to speak on value-added properties that he is working on in wheat to kind of boost revenue streams for our wheat producers. There's also some nitrogen trials. I believe they're going to be kind of showing off. More details are to come, but that's kind of the gist of what's going to happen at the North Central Field Day, and there will be lunch to follow.
When is this field day taking place?
This event will occur Thursday, June 12th, starting at 9 a.m.
And if people have more questions, who can they reach out to?
They should probably reach out to the ag agent in the River Valley District, Luke Byers.
Tina, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan discussing control of Sericea Lespedeza. If you'd like to read more on this topic, you can do so by checking out a recent Agronomy e-update article, which is titled Early Summer Control of Sericea Lespedeza Using Herbicides. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or as always, you can find e-update articles by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Tina also mentioned an upcoming wheat variety development and management field day that is taking place Thursday, June 12th at 9 a.m. This will be taking place in the North Central Kansas Experiment Farm, which is 2 miles west of Belleville, Kansas. Speakers at the event include Rami Lovato, Alan Fritz, and Kelsey Anderson Onofre. They will discuss tailoring optimal nitrogen management by variety, assessing head scab and wheat streak mosaic tolerance and performance by variety, and incorporating value-added traits into new wheat variety releases. If you're looking to find more information on this event, you can contact Luke Byers with the River Valley Extension District, as he is the Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent. You can do so by calling 785-632-5335 or by sending him an email at lsbyers@ksu.edu. I will link all this information in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Maydinger as she discusses how USDA is releasing payments to livestock producers suffering grazing losses from the past 2 years.
USDA announced it will be expediting emergency livestock relief program payments to cattle producers who suffered losses from drought and wildfire in 2023 and or 2024. The Farm Service Agency will use existing livestock forage disaster program data to streamline payment calculations. Payments automatically will be issued to eligible producers who have an approved LFP application on file for 2023 and or 2024. No separate application will be required. To be eligible for emergency livestock relief program payments, a producer must have suffered grazing losses in a county rated by the U.S. Drought Monitor as having a D2 level of drought intensity for 8 consecutive weeks, or a D3 or higher during normal grazing periods established in 2023, 2024, or both calendar years, and have applied and been approved for LFP. To calculate these payments, FSA will use livestock inventories and drought-affected forage acreage or restricted animal units and grazing days due to wildfire already reported by the producer when they submitted their LFP form. Producers can receive payments for 1 or both years. FSA will announce additional emergency livestock relief program assistance for other authorized losses, including flooding, later this summer. For more information, contact your local FSA office. I'm Scarlett Maydinger.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with another segment of Faces in Agriculture. And this week we're joined by someone involved in agriculture in Montgomery and Wilson County, Michael Springer. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Michael,
can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in agriculture?
Well, I operate Springer Family Foods, and Springer Family Foods is a third-generation hog operation, farrow to finish. We have about 3,500 sows and sell over 80,000 market hogs annually. My family also grain farms, and we farm about 8,000 acres in Montgomery and Wilson County, raising wheat, corn, and soybeans.
Has it been this big of an operation for a long time, or has it been a slow expansion into this size?
It's grown over time. My grandfather actually started farming in the late 1940s. Had some cows and some chickens, and then later got into pigs in the 50s. Today I farm with my parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and of course my wife, and we have 2 boys. One's a freshman at K-State, and the other's be a senior in high school. Our operation grew a lot through the 80s and the 90s, and then in the mid-2000s, my aunt and uncle had a farm of their own, and we merged those together. So we put all the family's hog operations into one business. We were 2,300 sows in 2008, and we've grown to where we're at now. It's a difficult time in the pig industry for growth. Cost of construction, the pig business has been a little rough. 2023 was a rough year financially for our business and many other producers. So it's been, I don't have big growth plans in mind. It's more of a sustain and survive mode. And the cost of construction has really deterred a lot of new buildings. So we have a lot of older facility, and we try to keep those up so we can use what we have.
Beyond the financial challenges, what have been some other challenges for Springer Family Foods?
Well, there's a challenge every day because we're in business. I would tell you that in the pig industry in general, animal health, if you don't have the health, you don't have anything in pigs. Keeping the pigs healthy, they're more productive. Obviously, the costs are less and so on and so forth. But we went through a repopulation in 2008, which is one of the reasons for the business merger. So that's the number one thing, biosecurity, keeping things out, keeping PRRS virus out, and protecting our animals. That's the biggest concern and the most important thing. And then labor, like many other farms in general and businesses, just maintaining the needed labor force. I have 30 people. I have a lot of good people. I have several people that have been with us for 5 and 10 years, and have some on staff that's, I'm going to get it wrong, but I guess 26 years. So I'm pretty happy with the workforce I have, but it's a challenge to continue building that. We depend heavily on T and visa workers, and then I hire a lot of people locally. But that's been finding the labor, and the human resources side of the business has definitely been the most challenging part for me ever since I've joined the family farm in 2000.
Michael, what makes you excited for the future of agriculture?
Well, I'm actually here in Manhattan for the FFA convention, and just seeing the young people that are coming forward that have interest in agriculture and all the opportunities there. And, I've thought for a long time, the population's growing. We've got a challenge to feed more and more people worldwide. I tell people our farm feeds about 350,000 people a year. And I'm pretty excited about that, actually. So I think that the opportunity to feed the world is a challenge, and that makes me excited. And it's really excited to see young people interested in agriculture and the passion that they have. So kind of a two-sided coin for me.
If people want to find out more information about Springer Family Foods, how can they do that? Check out our website at springerfamilyfoods.com or follow us on Facebook. That was Michael Springer, who's involved in agriculture in Montgomery and Wilson County. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.